moment. I was not here last night to start the fest. Tommy Frangione, my partner in crime here, does a brilliant job. And Mark started this off, because last night was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction dinner at the Barclays Center. And I've been lucky enough to attend a lot of these because of being on radio at Q1043 and gotten to know people through the years. And some people are acquaintances and some people are friends. And a lot of times, a band has their moment, and then that's their moment, and they remember their moment. And rarely, if ever, does a band get a second chance to come back around and not only play, but record new music and get a whole world of people to follow them and find them. And it doesn't happen by accident. A fairy doesn't wave their magic wand. It's hard work. It's playing clubs. It's playing 50-seat clubs and touring 50-seat clubs across all of America and across the UK and Europe. And then 100-seat clubs. And you keep going and writing. And you even, and you know, when now you're about 40, 50 years older than you used to be when you started, but it's the same hard work. And sometimes, I believe it's good karma for great people. It pays off in a weekend like this. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce, as of last night, Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, the Zombies. Colin Blunstone, Hugh Grundy, Chris White. I said to them, and they've got a management team, Chris and Cindy have worked since day one along with them to rebuild this. And I said, I know it's going to be a busy weekend, but please come to the fest for Beatles fans. I said, it's your fans. There are a few thousand people who need to see you. Gentlemen, we're here for you. First question, has anybody slept?
Not me, no.
Not very much. So it's so exciting last night. Wonderful. 14,000 people at the Barclays Center.
Wow.
Yes.
And we went on quite near the end, and so we were sitting there for 3 hours waiting to play. It's so exciting. All these wonderful bands playing, and then our moment came, and we really wanted to treasure it. And of course, the adrenaline was really running through our veins all night, and so we haven't slept. But it's great to be here with you and to share this great excitement.
It was kind of neat for me as a Brooklyn boy to have it at the Barclays. Had you played Brooklyn before in any of the Murray McKay shows and that stuff?
That was our very first show over here. We came over on Christmas Day, 1964, with the #1 record in the nation. And we were playing with Patti LaBelle, Benny King, the Drifters, the Shirelles, Chuck Jackson. It was just, I mean, we were scared stiff because these guys were so talented. We were 18, 19 years old, you know. But they were fantastic to us. They took us to their hearts. And I remember particularly some wonderful sessions speaking with all of us to Patti LaBelle after the shows each night, and she became a real friend. And she was, I remember her saying at that time, there's a new kid on the block, you've got to check her out. She's called Aretha Franklin. I remember that.
A new kid on the block.
And then she said, and another girl you've got to really look at is Nina Simone. We hadn't heard either of these names. Aretha hadn't even joined Atlantic. It was their cabaret period before then. But, you know, it's treasured memories, actually.
Was that your first trip to America for all of you?
Yes, it was 6 months after we signed the contract.
Were you scared?
Just a bit. You see, the thing to remember is that America is the home of rock and roll, it's the home of the blues, and this is the music we absolutely loved. So all British musicians have desperate to get to America, to the home of rock and roll. And so all our dreams came true, but we were 18 and 19 years old, so it was quite a lot to take in. It was very, very exciting and incredibly scary.
When everybody has said to me, every band that first did this in the 60s all said, it's very big. America is bigger than we are.
Not only big, but it was. I mean, New York, when I first came to New York, I didn't like it for the first couple of trips because it was just so overwhelming. And the difference between the culture in the UK and in America at that time was unbelievable. All the cars to us at that time looked like mobile jukeboxes, you know, and it was so different to the UK, the UK situation culturally. So it was quite overwhelming at first. But then New York actually has become one of my favourite places in the world, I have to say.
Awesome.
Also, the main thing, I think when we first came here, is to hear sirens on the cars, because English police cars had bells. So we weren't used to that.
Who was it? Somebody, Neil Innes, who used to the Bonzo Dog Band, said we rented a map, we bought a map and we rented a car because we're going to drive to Canada and drive. He goes, we never noticed. We just thought we're kids that England would be the same size. Nobody ever said to us, you could fit 4 UKs inside this country. We thought, well, we'll drive to Chicago. How long could that be? And he goes, well, it must be like from London to Liverpool. It looks like it's that far.
There was, I remember early on discovering there was a ranch in Texas called King Ranch, and it's bigger than it's bigger than England. One ranch, unbelievable.
It's big. It's very big. How this all started, and it's something that Colin and I were talking about before with Rod. They're playing. The band has gone their separate ways. You created Argent. We've got these huge, beautiful hits of Hold Your Head Up and God Gave Rock and Roll to You. It's just brilliant. And what year was it? Was it 2004? When did you sing together? When did you guys play?
Well, it was either when we got back together.
Got back together.
It was either 1999 or 2000.
Well, I was 55, so it was 2000.
Oh yeah, I was 35. I remember. So we got back together again, and Rod's a very successful producer. He was a studio musician, and I had a keyboard player in my solo band who never turned up. He was one of those guys who he might turn up and he might not. It was getting very, very difficult. So I said to Rod, is there any chance you could help me with the rest of this tour? And Rod said, very kindly, I'll do these last 6 dates, I'll do them, but I don't want to do any more than that. And that was 20 years ago. So the 6 dates grew into 20 years. That's how we got back together again.
We didn't actually get over to America. I think when you say 2004, that was probably
When I first saw you here.
about the time when we came back to America for the first time, yeah.
6 dates, and I won't do another one. Famous last words.
Yeah, there's been another 5 since then, Colin, isn't it? No, it was crazy, and we've been touring really, really intensely. Not so much with these 2 fantastic guys, the original guys. I mean, that actually came about because Colin and I, first of all, got back together. To my amazement, it was a complete buzz, and I really, really enjoyed it. So it just carried on and carried on. Chris used to come and see us. We started to do more and more Zombies material because we realised there was a lot of stuff we'd never ever played live. And then one day Chris said, do you know what? 2008 is coming up, and that's the 40th anniversary of Odyssey and Oracle. He said, do you realise, because we broke up before Odyssey and Oracle actually came out, we've never played the album from start to finish. He said, what do you think about the idea of getting the surviving original guys back together again? And we started thinking about this, and we didn't know if it's going to be possible, but then we realised that when we recorded, and it had a lot to do with the Beatles as well, because we walked into Abbey Road just as they were walking out, having finished Sgt. Pepper, and they'd left all their two things that they gave to us really in that studio. First of all, because Brian Wilson had used an 8-track on Pet Sounds, Paul McCartney and John Lennon said, "We've got to have an 8-track." And the guys at Abbey Road said, "There is not an 8-track in this country." And John Lennon said, "Well, sort it out. We need more tracks." So, and he just walked out the room as he usually did, you know. So they scratched their head and they went to the ends of the earth to do this, and they discovered methods of basically of providing more tracks to record.
Linking two machines together.
So what actually happened was that the other thing that John Lennon had left around in the studio and hadn't picked up yet was his mellotron. And so, sorry John, but I didn't even ask him, but I just opened it up and there's mellotron all over Odyssey and Oracle. But it means that when you do the stuff live, it's very important to have two different keyboard parts. So we started with the premise saying, listen, if we are going to do Odyssey and Oracle, we're going to reproduce every single note on the album. And that means, first of all, there was only one guy we could think of, Darian Satanaja from the Brian Wilson band, he's fantastic musician. And he knew my keyboard parts better than I did. In fact, when we started rehearsing, he'd say, "Rod, I think you'll find you played this here."
That's an awkward conversation.
Well, not really, you know. But and I would say to him, no, Darian, that's not the harmony. He said, "Can I just play you this?" And, you know, so he was absolutely fantastic. And he played those second keyboard parts. Chris, at the time, Chris and I, when we recorded Odyssey and Oracle, were sharing a flat, and we wrote it in the flat, and we would talk to each other. And one of the things Chris had in the flat was an 1890-something Victorian pump organ, and we did Butcher's Tale on that, and he'd long since lost that.
Yes, it did.
So I sourced, for 2008, another Victorian pump organ, you know, with sort of everything, with you know, you have to do this as you're playing it. And we did. We reproduced every single note on the album. And it's occasion. That was supposed to be the only gig that we ever did of Odyssey.
Also, Rod, I don't know if you remember, but when we were first talking about doing Odyssey and Oracle in its entirety with the surviving original members, Ron and I had been out playing live regularly, so we were used to being out on the road and playing concerts. But Chris and Hugh hadn't been playing. I don't think Chris had picked up a bass guitar in 40 years. Since 1967, that's the last time he picked up a bass guitar.
On stage.
Truth is, I actually had been playing, but in the smaller type of little local dance bands and little rock bands that I was playing in. So I wasn't too far match fit.
Absolutely. But I said to Rod, you know, before we commit to playing in a big venue, the whole of Odyssey and Oracle live, we really ought to get together with the other two and just see if they can still play it. Now, it might sound a bit rude, but I thought it was just being
It's a fair
sensible.
question to ask.
It's, you know, so we got together one morning at Rod's, and these two guys had really done their homework, and they were absolutely note perfect. They were note perfect. And Rod and I, who had been out on the road regularly, playing to here, there and everywhere, we were bloody awful. we
Complete disaster.
We hadn't practiced at all. These guys were fantastic. Rod and I, we walked out with our tails between our legs because we just were making mistakes all over the place. So it was very, very funny, and we got our comeuppance, I'm afraid. But then we did practice a bit, didn't we?
We did, and that was supposed to be one night, and the place sold out immediately, and so it became 3 nights. And then before we went on stage for that first night of Odyssey and Oracle, our manager, we always tell people never to say who's in the audience, you know, because it can freak you out if a real hero of yours is in the audience. But he just said, "Oh, there's Robert Plant out there, there's Snow Patrol, there's Robin Hitchcock." I can't remember all the people that were there actually, and Paul Weller. And he said, and Paul Weller, he said, "I've just been out and it's raining hard, and he's waiting in line, you know, about 300 or 400 yards away." And we said, "Oh, for God's sake, get him in." And he came to, it was 3 nights in the end, he came to all 3 concerts. And before we walked on stage that night, I thought, my God, I hope this is going to work. Because if it doesn't, this is going to be the longest night of my life. You know? But we could tell within a minute or 2 minutes that it was going to be great. And then, so after that, occasionally we put things together, and particularly last year was the 50th anniversary of the recording or the release of Odyssey and Oracle. So we actually said, okay, this year we're going to concentrate on it. So Hugh and Chris came along with us and toured a lot with us over the last year, and it's been fantastic. The last tour we've done in America was in 1965, and this felt like continuing that tour. Chris's jokes were exactly the same.
Ouch.
And of course,
Never remember the punchlines.
there's a real connection with Odyssey and Oracle and the Beatles, because, as Rod's already said, the Beatles literally walked out the day before. They just finished Sgt. Pepper. They walked out the day before we went in to do Odyssey and Oracle. Sadly, we didn't meet them, but the tambourines and other percussion instruments were all over the floor. Because we're big Beatles fans, and we were picking up these percussion instruments off of the floor where they'd left them. And of course, as Rod said, he was using John Lennon's Mellotron, and we used the same engineers that they used. Jeff Emmerich, who's been here, who's a very well-known engineer. There's another one called Peter Vince, who worked with the Beatles, and although we mostly use a different studio to them, we use Studio 3, which if you're going to Abbey Road, Studio 3 is the first studio on the left. They did record in there, but mostly they recorded in Studio 2, which is further down the corridor, just in case you ever go there to record. It's further down, and it's on the right, and then you go down these famous steps where they used to record, and they would look up at the control room. But really, there is a connection between Odyssey and Oracle and Sgt. Pepper, because we were using the same studios and the same engineers.
One of the things that Jeff Emmerich, who's became so lucky to have become a dear friend, and so many of us here that he came many times, and when we asked him, I said, why did you grab, what was it about the Zombies? And I know you guys have talked with him since, and he said, every band that was being booked into Abbey Road said, I want the Beatles engineer, we want the Beatles sound. And he said, I always said no, because the Beatles sound the Beatles sound. I don't care who you are, what's your sound? And he said, when these guys came in, they never said we wanted the Beatles sound. He said, it was, we want to create our sound. And he said, this ethereal, beautiful sound. He said, it's as psychedelic as anything we did on Pepper, but it sounds nothing like Pepper. I'm in. What can I do to help? And think about what the ask is. They didn't ask to sound like the Beatles. They came into the same studio with these equipment, but made this gem of this gorgeous, ethereal album. I mean, and I mean it sincerely. I'm friends with them and fans, but from Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and Strawberry Fields to Beechwood Park to where you take us in its journeys, these musical journeys. And Jeff always describes sound. He said, I see it in colors. He said, I like to paint. And that's what I always felt that album did. And for all these people who have suddenly discovered Odyssey and Oracle, we all had to hit single time of the season. But a song like Chris's The Butcher's Tale, which I had missed as a child, it is the most painfully honest, heartbreaking, beautiful song. Sir, what an amazing piece of work.
Thank you.
It is heartbreaking, and then, rather than guitars, for you to take that pump organ to it. That is as magical, and I mean it sincerely where I'm saying, that's as magical as any music decision John, Paul, or George ever made.
We had to take the pedal organ on top of our van to Abbey Road because they didn't have the same thing there, so that was quite an effort.
But you know, we saw Jeff Emmerich just literally a few days before he died, and we were doing a concert with Arcade Fire in Los Angeles, and Jeff came along, and I must have spoken to him for an hour, and at the end of it he said, don't forget our conversation, do not forget. He said, this is not just something I'm saying. He said, we have to do another record together. We have to do it. And he said, will you phone me? We'll get this together and talk about it over the next few days. and then 3 days later he was dead. It was so sad, but he did have a working affection with us actually, and we did with Jeff. I remember when one of the tracks he did recording for in the studio was Time of the Season, and I remember that first simple bass and tom riff at the beginning. He actually got something that it was so, the bass and the toms were so in tune with each other. There was just something quite magic about the way he heard that combination. And I remember George Martin saying that on Revolver, he said really that whole album was down to Jeff Emery. He said he was it about 15 or 16 at the time? He was incredibly young.
His first time as the chief engineer behind the desk, as he said, I walk in, I've got my fresh grease pencils, I've got fresh tape, and John walks in the door and says, I want to sound like the Dalai Lama screaming from a mountaintop. He said, and then George Martin says, well, let Jeff sort it, and we'll leave. And he goes, and my heart sank, because all I've got is 2 tape decks, a mixing board, and equipment. Well, what are you going to do then? He goes, oh, all right. But every punch-in that you have now in Pro Tools, and every digital trick, is something that Jeff and these guys did, like, let's move this, we'll put a tea-towel on the drums, and what if I solder the mic to the Leslie, and then I'll mic and make up, literally like Rube Goldberg, making up equipment as you guys went along, and look what the result was.
And he wasn't scared of forgetting all the rules. I mean, it was just what you were saying, really.
He said I was too young to know.
He was too young. And George Martin tells the story of when he was working on Revolver, and they were all very proper in Abbey Road. It was a very old-fashioned studio. They were great guys, but very old-fashioned. And Jeff Emerick was getting the sound, and he said to George, it needs some top. And George said, okay, well, so we'll try a bit of top. And then Jeff Emerick says, that's not top, this is top. And he turned it up to 100%, and George went, my initial reaction was, oh! But it was great. He changed their way of thinking about things.
So he said, I hadn't read the handbook of all mics must be at least 8 inches from a drum. I didn't read that. He wanted the drums louder, so I took the front of the drum off and put the mic in it, but it was too boomy. And then I noticed there was a doll the Rolling Stones had sent, so I put the doll in the kick drum, and that seemed to fix it. As has every drummer ever now put a sandbag or something in the kick drum.
Absolutely. I was very lucky to have my kit, and I got the same kit as Ringo had. I thought, if it's good enough for Ringo, it's going to be good enough for me. So when we recorded, I put those drums exactly where Ringo had sat. He took the head off, and he did exactly that.
Did he?
Yeah, and fantastic.
You just, as I said, as an amateur drummer, I had Alan White here. We've got Hugh Grundy. There's a basic, that Mersey beat. It's a dance beat of, that you can play like they did Sgt. Pepper's. What you're playing on that album, on Odyssey and Oracle, from Time of the Season to Cell Block, to all, even on, She's Not There and Tell Her No. There's so much. You're playing jazz organ. You're creating these different polyrhythms. It is so far ahead of what everybody else was doing musically at the time. I always thought, even as a kid, that your music, the musicality of your band, was right behind the fence. You were right there trying to break through.
But also you should ask Hugh how he became a drummer in the first place, because he wasn't a drummer to start with.
You were a bugler?
I wasn't quite right.
Colin told me?
You're quite right. As I said last night, to faint applause, I was at the school with Rod and Paul, our dear late departed darling Paul, and I was in the marching band, the school marching band, and at that point I was playing the bugle, and I thought to myself, I'm not liking this because we're marching at the back of the band. I really need to get up the front. And I had no inkling of drums, although my father, who was an aircraft engineer, had made me a drum from various bits of old aircraft when I was about 2 or 3, literally. And I used to drive my mum mad, but I probably sort of grew out of that. But after that, I decided to move on to the drums.
But why did you want to be at the front of the band?
The very simple reason was, I thought the girls who were lining the streets would be looking at me more than anybody else. How vain was that?
has always been the case. You know, the head shake to playing drums in the front of the marching band it's always the same reason for a teenager.
Absolutely.
Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, the Zombies, with us. Thank you so much for coming. We have a few more minutes. Can we stay for a little? Okay. Here's the craziest part of the Zombie story that doesn't touch the Stones or the Beatles or the Who or Zeppelin or anything. They've created this masterpiece, and it's something we touched on a moment ago. Before they go out to tour with their Sgt. Pepper's album, the band breaks up. Before it even gets out there. And you were so sweet to mention Al Cooper last night in your induction speech. Does anybody know Al Cooper, Blood, Sweat, and Tears? So Al Cooper is working as an A&R guy, you know, at the record label. And he's in England, right? And he gets a bunch of records and he's listening through them, just listing. And he told me the story years ago. And I put on this weird looking thing, Odyssey and Oracle. And it's cool. And it gets the time of the season. And he went to the Bostons and went, "You have a hit record here." They went, "No. This is a hit record." The band broke up because I don't care if they're alive or dead. This is a hit record. This is a hit record. But no, I'm telling you, this is as big a hit as you've ever had. So there's no Zombies, and Odyssey and Oracle comes out, and Time of the Season is one of the biggest hits in the world.
And not only that, it's we found out because you know this is quite often the case with our early records that the record executives would hear them and say that's not commercial. You know, it happens. She's not there.
What?
Yeah,
they didn't think She's Not There as commercial.
They just didn't really get it. I mean, they put it out. You know, they thought it's a nice record, but you know, nothing's going to happen. But anyway, the Time of the Season, it was the last gasp release from Clive Davis, you know, who was actually convinced by Al to put it out, and it has become, I think, one of the top 50 English records in number of plays that's ever been played in America.
Every single person here, including myself, can remember exactly where we were when we heard it. It was that special. It exploded out of that radio.
Well, one of the most interesting things is the same night we were inducted, that year, that day, the 29th, 50 years ago exactly, it went to #1 in Cashbox.
So the day,
Really? Yesterday.
Yesterday.
It's something we talked about with Alan White. It is a kismet, a karma, whatever you want to call it. There's a reason this all seems to be happening. Everybody said, what if Ivan didn't introduce 15-year-old Paul to John Lennon? But he did. And what if you did? But you did. And these things, coincidence, you know, karma, God, whatever you want to say, these things just keep happening. But without them, can I share the ZZ Top story?
Yeah.
So Billy Gibbons has become an acquaintance, and I didn't know this at all. I didn't read it. And I was just talking about how much I love the Zombies. He's got this weird smile on his face. My wife goes, "You know this, right?" And I said, "What?" He goes, "Well, we weren't getting anywhere in Texas. You know, we're just playing some blues, and we love the Zombies. And we read they broke up. So I said to Dusty, well, ain't nobody really knows what they look like down here, so what if we're the Zombies?" My hand to God, what you know is ZZ Top. How they toured as the Texas as the Zombies.
And when things start to go downhill for us, we're going to become a ZZ Top tribute band.
That's still one of the great stories ever. Did you ever meet Billy and
No.
talk to him?
No, I haven't, no.
I mean, in a weird way, he kind of kept the brand alive that somebody was touring. It was the first tribute band, but they actually called themselves the Zombies, not Odyssey and Oracle. Coming back to this amazing album, which, by the way, is misspelled. How did that happen, Chris?
We were, Rod and I were sharing a flat with, I was at art college with a friend, and he said, "Oh, I'll come up with an idea for the cover." And Rod and I were so busy working that we didn't notice that he'd spelt it wrong.
He just put out the first scheme of it,
That's right.
and it was very psychedelic, and we absolutely loved it. And I think we were on tour actually, and
I
we
wish
said
they
just
would
go ahead
tell
and
the
finish
story
it.
that George
And the record
Harrison
company
liked.
loved it. But when we
not
got
there.
back, they said, "Oh, it's all finished. Will you come in and approve it?"
That's
They
an
actually said
important
that we'd come
story
in and
to
approve it.
tell right
So we
now.
walked in and we looked at it and we absolutely loved it. But we said to each other, "He spelled it wrong." So we said to the guy, "Well, he's just got to change that." And the guy from the record company said, "No, it's all, it's all done and dusted. We haven't got any more money for this, so it has to go out like it is." And I said to Chris, "What the hell are we going to do?" So I said, "I tell you what, we'll make up this story that it's an ode, it's a play on words, ode, and a journey in song, and that was the sort of slightly shaky thing that we said. But the thing is, that's what we told Colin as well."
I couldn't believe it. And I believed it at the time. This is 1966.
Are you serious?
I believed it. And then we were doing an interview like this.
When we were together in this new... Oh, no, it was just before that, wasn't it? In 99 or something.
It's
yeah.
just a few years ago. And in the interview, he let it slip that it was a mistake, and he made up this rather shaky story to cover it. And I said to him, "Rod, bloody hell, mate. You've been telling me that story for 40 years. Couldn't you have at least confided in me?"
I'm singing the bloody thing. At least you're gonna know
I
it.
sang the whole bloody record, and I believed the story. Never trust Rod Argent.
But trust him about a great song, like Time of the Season, which one of the first interviews that I did, the man who sang it, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Mr. Blunstone over here, hated it.
I didn't like it. I didn't hate it. I thought it was fairly ordinary, actually. And
Really?
I felt the same thing about you.
well, the thing is that it was the last song that we recorded on the album. It was finished in the morning before we recorded it. So to be honest, I didn't really know the tune. So the fact that I didn't like it might be something to do with the fact I didn't even know the bloody tune. And we went into the studio and we were running out of time. And I remember when I was singing it, there was a big clock, there was a red light in front, so I knew we were recording. That was on my mind. Then there was a big clock and at Abbey Road you couldn't overrun. I knew we were running out of time. So I was panicking to get this thing right. Rob was in the control room, and he was very kindly leading me through the song and saying the phrasing wasn't quite right. Now, Colin, can you just try that again? And we just get a little bit, and it's getting more and more heated. So can I use a little bit of
Yes, you
language?
can.
So I'm saying, listen, if you're so bloody clever, you bloody come in here and you bloody sing it. And he said to me, of course everyone can hear, this is in the control, it's not just me in here, everyone can hear. And he said to me, "You're the bloody lead singer, you stand there till you get it bloody right." So this is what's going on.